look, at the end of the day, wisdom, what is a leader? A leader is someone that you want to emulate, you want to follow, you want to mirror, you want to some degree also be. And if you yourself are not regulated in that fashion, if you yourself are not able to do for yourself what you expect your team to do, then you're not only being inauthentic, you're also not being present to what's happening. So how do you become self-regulated?
Today on Wisdom Journey podcast, we're joined by Savio P, Clemente, keynote speaker, healthcare leadership strategist, TEDx speaker, analyst, and resilience expert. After interviewing more than 2,000 global leaders and surviving cancer twice himself, Savio now helps executives and organizations recover performance after disruption and high-pressure moments. In this conversation, we explore decision fatigue, leadership under pressure, resilience, identity, and how leaders can regain clarity when the crisis may be over, but the pressure remains. Welcome to the podcast, Savio.
Thank you so much, Wisdom. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to seeing where we discuss the important things that matter in people's lives.
You're welcome. I noticed while I was doing the research that you survived cancer twice. I'm curious, what were the biggest beliefs or mindset shifts that changed after you experienced and survived cancer twice?
So initially, I was diagnosed in 2014. I did 6 rounds of something called R-CHOP chemotherapy, and then I was in remission for a decade. And then June of 2024, I had a relapse, and that involved so much more. That involved 2-3 day stays in the hospital. I'm doing stem cell harvesting, stem cell transplant, 29 days in the hospital. I lost 26 pounds. One night I had tachycardia, and so they had to rush me to the ICU. I also then left the hospital after 29 days, did about 4.5 months of immunotherapy and then 5 months of physical therapy. I tell this story because at the end of the day, and then through all that, I was able to receive a complete response to treatment. So the treatment worked. It was 16 months of treatment.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
So the biggest mindset shift, I think, would be 3 things. So number 1, there's only so much that I can control. Number 2, allowing and reframing the medicine and the drugs as not being toxic. Yes, they cause side effects. Yes, I experienced those side effects, but allowing myself to see them as something that's an elixir or mana from the universe, something that allows me to feel like I can surrender and submit to it, that it's something for me rather than something against me. And then the third thing is something that a lot of people, when they're faced with their mortality, fear. Most of them fear the death process. No one knows exactly what happens. I wasn't really fearful of that. I was more fearful that I didn't finish what I came here to do. Of course, none of us have an assignment given to us in physical form, but I just felt like maybe my mission or whatever I want to accomplish was going to be cut short. And when I mean what to accomplish, I don't always mean something in the physical professional world. I mean, what do I learn? What do I give? What do I take? What am I grateful for? Those type of things.
You said, what do I give? What do I take? What do I learn?
Absolutely.
So, what do I take? That part, can you tell me what?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people that often feel like life is about climbing the ladder or climbing the mountain. And of course, professionally, that does seem like that. But I'm talking about something much deeper, something that's much guttural, something that is about our connection. Listen, we live in a disruptive world, socially, politically, no matter what country you're in, and also now technologically with AI. Content and being given information is very easy and very simple and very fast nowadays. What actually sticks are our connections with one another. What do we actually take from one another? Not take in a negative sense, but take in terms of what they're actually sharing. Like, for example, I'm sharing this with you today. And what do we actually give in return? Because I believe that it's a give and take situation. Like when I was in the hospital and the doctors would do their rounds, imagine quarantine room, 29 days. I just made sure I mustered enough energy and strength to actually meet the doctors where they were, because they weren't just healing me. I was healing myself through them. And so it was a shared partnership in that situation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for expatiating on that. What parts of your identity had to change after going through adversity at that level?
Yeah. I'm a firm believer that you have to name things in life so that way not only can you categorize it, but you can actually see what the challenge is in front of you. But I don't believe in identifying with it. So in other words, I didn't identify with my disease. Yes, I'm a 2-time cancer survivor. I'm proud of it. yes, I went through what I went through, and that's important to distinguish and to state what that is. But the parts that changed with me was really about not allowing any definition to rule my decision-making moving forward. What I do, as you mentioned earlier in the brief, as a keynote speaker, TEDx speaker, board certified wellness coach, a journalist at this point, I've interviewed 2,000 plus leaders, change makers, and also celebrities. What I find in all of those conversations and all of my work is a lot of people hang on to their role or their title, especially in healthcare leadership. They're caring for themselves, they're caring for their team, they're also caring for another human being. So it's high stakes. But in that, they wear masks. And those masks actually dilute our ability to actually grow with one another, to actually learn from one another, to actually feed the ecosystem. To a large degree, I would say my cancer experience, especially a second time, was like a spiritual exile. I grew up with a Catholic faith, but I also studied belief systems from Buddhism to Jewish mysticism all the way to Vedic philosophy. So I think it's important that whatever life throws at you, that you're able to not only recalibrate and figure out a new way forward, but also to allow yourself the grace to be present for what's actually happening in your life.
The work you do is, helping people recover even after the crisis. I'm curious, why do many leaders struggle after the crisis is technically over? I mean, in your case, you recover for cancer and everything was like, what's the word? Remission? Is it remission? Was gone, was gone, and you're good. You're like good as brand new. And but then now comes the next challenge. How do I get back on my feet?
Well, this is the crux, especially with healthcare leaders that I speak on keynote stages with, because in other words, they want to gain the clarity and they make the high decisions after disruption, but the pressure really hasn't gone. It's just gone internal. And that's where you either win or lose. And for the most part, people think, yes, let's just survive the crisis and everything's good. But that's not where the recalibration, the reinvention comes. It comes from after. And that's really where you win or lose. Because at the end of the day, it's all about how am I supposed to allow myself the tools, the resources to actually see a new beginning for myself and for the team and for the organization. It's very important because for a large degree, self-regulation is not really taught with us. Like when I was in the hospital, the doctors would look for certain check marks. They would see if my red blood cells were good, my white blood cells were good, my platelets. But wisdom, can I control any of that? I can't control any of that. I can control my emotions. I can control my mental faculty to some degree. I can control my physiology to a little bit of a degree in terms of if I'm feeling pain, I would sort of move around or try to allow myself to have that comfort. So I think it's very important that people realize that you only have so much to give in a situation. Another principle that I used also was this idea of psychological distancing, that giving myself a buffer or space between the person who was in the bed being attached to all those machines in a quarantine room with nurses coming every 4 hours to check my vitals, and then something much greater than myself. And two anchors that I used in the hospital setting was silence and stillness. No matter what belief system you believe, those things are available to us anywhere, anytime. And when I sank into it, there's this concept called metacognition. You might have heard of it or you might have not. It's really about the thinking of the thinking. Who's actually in control of the thinking? So I was there in the hospital bed, but who's actually controlling consciousness? Who's actually controlling my thoughts? How is that? And I don't like to speak heavily about it because then people get caught up in the head about thinking about the thinking. But that is very important. And then also the last part was this idea of adaptive resilience. Everyone knows about resilience for the most part. I think I was the poster child of resilience for those 10 years of being cancer-free. But adaptive resilience is when you're in the mess, when you're in the discomfort, how do you create strategies? How do you remain flexible? How do you allow yourself to move forward?
Yeah. How do you allow yourself to move forward? I'm curious what happens, psychologically when you're under pressure, not just pressure, prolonged pressure. What happens when we suddenly turn off the pressure and like stop it and say maybe change environment? What happens to that high performer that's been exposed for so long?
with healthcare leaders, individuals who are high performance, like you mentioned, often what ends up happening is you have that cognitive load, that cognitive pressure, and then that affects your physiology, that affects your thinking, your decision making, that affects the team. You end up sometimes displaying some negative behavior patterns. Look, at the end of the day, wisdom, what is a leader? A leader is someone that you want to emulate, you want to follow, you want to mirror, you want to some degree also be. And if you yourself are not regulated in that fashion, if you yourself are not able to do for yourself what you expect your team to do, then you're not only being inauthentic, you're also not being present to what's happening. So how do you become self-regulated? How do you become more present? For me, it's meditation. I meditate 20 minutes a day. I started off with 1 minute and now I'm 20 minutes a day, but it could be prayer. It could be journaling. It could be breathing exercises. It could be walking in silence, a whole bunch of things. We live in a world where these tools are available to us. This is not you have to go to a spa. This is little micro things that you can do. You mentioned earlier that I'm a TEDx speaker. I did a TEDx talk before my cancer relapse. It was called 7 Minutes to Wellness, How to Love Your Inner Stranger. And people often ask, wait, what do you mean inner stranger? And I said, I left it nebulous on purpose. They're like, so what's your inner stranger? I'm like, my inner stranger, it's that young person who never felt completely grounded and rooted, like he belonged. Like I didn't have any issues, but I just never really felt attached. And then the person's like, oh, I see. For me, my inner stranger is that female professional that I can't seem to be, or that great mother, or that great sibling that I want to be. I just can't seem to achieve that level. And so it's really a framework within a framework, and it's called the Aloha Reboot and it's an acronym. And as we know in Hawaiian, aloha means hello. So it's a hello to your inner self. It's 7 minutes a day. And A stands for acknowledge where you are. Don't pretend like I was in the hospital bed. I was, cancer, stem cell transplant. That's the real deal. So just acknowledge, word vomit, put it all on paper or type it out, whatever that is for you. L stands for listening. So listen to your inner self. In Hawaiian, there's a healing modality called huna healing. And in huna healing, they believe that the body not only gives you sensations, but it actually has language, it has wisdom, it has consciousness, it has feeling, it knows certain things. And so the hunas believe that you can actually, the kahunas that is, believe that you can actually talk to the body. That the body can give you that information. I say don't do it in front of other people because they might think you're strange, but you can. O stands for opening. So open yourself up to all this information. You're just exploring yourself. So no matter what your belief system is, it's just exploring self. H stands for harnessing. So harness this information, make the mental connection, see what works, what doesn't work. Not everything's going to work. And A stands for acting. But there's a caveat. I always tell people that you have to have courage to act because the research and the data points to this idea that it's not that people don't want to change. It's called the models of change. It's that people are thinking of changing, wanting to change, are in change, thinking of relapsing, going back to change. So it's not that people don't want to, they just don't know how to. And so that's called the Aloha Reboot. Even if you can't do 7 minutes a day, you could take one of them and do it for 1 day, for 1 minute. But it really allows you to come back to yourself.
Hey, quick break. Before we continue, I'd love for you to join the Wisdom Journey newsletter. Every week, I share exclusive insights, tools, and behind-the-scenes updates to help you stay ahead in your own journey of building an online business. It's simple, practical, and built to help you grow. Sign up today for free at the link in the description. Now, let's get back to the episode. Wow, what does clear thinking actually look like during chaotic situations?
Well, in my world, they speak in technical jargon like strategic reversals and increasing ramp. All that is really heady information. But clear thinking, what is it really? It's really trying to figure out where you want to get from point A to point B. And in between is where the mess happens. So you could do a couple things. You could reverse engineer that thinking and really figure out for yourself, where do you want to go? You can actually create pivot points to see if A scenario doesn't work, how can I get to the other and maneuver myself around? And I would say the third thing is really, I think to a large degree, people rely only on their brain or their mind to actually figure out things. But a lot of data has points to the fact that you can actually rely on the heart or the gut in order to make those decisions. How many times have you heard people like, it doesn't feel right in my gut? It doesn't. And a really quick way of doing it, because I'm in board certified health and wellness coaches, I work a lot with the body. It's called somatic, which is soma is the body, or embodiment, as they say. And so I always tell my clients to actually visualize like an elevator and you're going down. So the elevator's here and you're going down to the heart or the gut. And I call it the three brains: head, heart, and gut. And so that actually can influence your thinking, not only your thinking, but not only your decision making, but also your ability to actually relate to one another. Because in a world of AI, like I mentioned previously, there's so much content out there that we're not lacking in content, we're lacking in connection.
Yeah, we're not lacking in content, we're lacking in connection. So how do we get the connection?
Well, I'll give you a personal example. I have two siblings. One of my siblings is on a different political spectrum that I do. I live in the U.S., so as you can imagine, it's very inflamed right now.
Yeah.
And so for a large portion of time, my sister and I didn't really agree. There was a lot of tension. But after my stem cell transplant, which I had in June of 2024, I realized something. Her and I are not going to move from our locations because I firmly believe that no one should be disenfranchised. And she believes something else, whatever the case may be. But I realized something. How am I going to get closer? How am I going to create unity with us differing on the situation? And so her and I both love our parents. They're thankfully still alive. So we talk about them.
Yeah.
We talk about food because I love food. She loves food. And we talk about travel. She loves travel. I love travel. So we talk about things that actually allow us to make the conversation positive and make the conversation something that we want to engage with and that's flourishing to us.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the first step, is that we have to realize what do we have in common with one another rather than what is our differences.
I love that. You know, you talk about a term called adaptive resilience leadership. What exactly is that?
Sure. It's a framework of mine that's part of the Aloha Reboot that I mentioned, and it's called the Adaptive Resilience Leadership Framework. And basically, it just posits that most leaders wait until they get overwhelmed, which then ends up being like burnout. But it helps them identify the stress signals, the patterns, to convert that into actionable clarity. So to turn really adversity into wisdom, into gold, so to speak, by acknowledging exactly what's actually happening and not trying to pretend that it's not happening, not trying to hide behind roles and titles because of your position in said company or said division or said team. It's really allowing your connection and your ability to allow that conversation to foster, because what's a leader? A leader is someone you see yourself in to some degree. You want to follow. You want to be a part of that mission statement.
Yeah. What inspired you to create the framework?
It was a combination of me being a journalist, me being a speaker, and also me being a coach and seeing the gaps. I call it the post-crisis leadership gap. It's this portion where things starts to drift, and then the drift creates a gap, and the gap creates a chasm, and that gets so much more bigger. And so I found, especially in my lived experience, which is really a large portion of the work that I do now, because anyone can learn something, anyone can gain experience, but you can't gain life experience until you've been through life. And life has given me some hard knocks, but I tell people all the time, I can speak to anyone for hours about the wound, how much I lost, how much pain, how much sorrow. But I'd rather, instead of speaking about the wound, I want to speak about the walk. And so I created these frameworks so that can help leadership and leadership teams be able to recognize and distinguish what happens after disruption, what happens after adversity, what happens after crisis. Because it's not about just surviving. Anyone can survive that with the right team, the right tools. But in my case, for example, I had a whole team of people with the stem cell transplant. After it was over, I only had myself. And this is echoed in a lot of conversations with cancer survivors. I wrote a book about 4 years ago where I've interviewed over 200 cancer survivors. I told 35 of their stories, including my own. It became a bestseller. And I think the reason why it germinated was two things. One, it spoke to the fact that cancer doesn't have to be a death sentence. And two, it spoke about this idea of forgiveness. And forgiveness wasn't about forgiving someone else, it's forgiving themselves, that they themselves could not meet the expectation of the world, that they themselves could not meet the expectations of themselves. And I tell people all the time, my story is very dramatic. Cancer survivor, 2-time cancer survivor. Like, that's huge. But this could relate to anything: job loss, business closure, infidelity, divorce, anything. The fact is, we have to find our way through life, through the maze. And sometimes those things, Oprah Winfrey once mentioned that life will throw you a pebble, then it will throw you a rock, then it will throw you a boulder. And when the boulder gets so big, it's not only hard to carry, it's hard to see past.
How does resilience differ from endurance or toughness?
I would echo that it goes back to Eastern philosophy. So I grew up Catholic. I've studied belief systems from Buddhism all the way down to Vedic philosophy. And they always talk about nature, that nature doesn't rush. The seed underneath the ground doesn't rush. We can't see the roots that are forming, but nature knows its direction. I covered a wellness journey in Italy, on the border of Italy and Austria. And there I did something called forest bathing. So basically she was a very well knowledged individual. And when we were there, she said something very profound to me. She says, nature doesn't need us, but we need nature. Nature will continue without us. And at the end of the day, I think it behooves all of us to really figure out for ourselves what are not only the motivations in trying to create the things that we want, but also figure out for ourselves, why are we doing it? You know, a lot of people do these things called gratitude journals, and I'm a big fan of doing them. But one of the hacks that I learned from one of my mentors was that when you create those lists, you ask yourself, why did that happen? So for example, I'm grateful for my home. Well, why did that happen? That happened because I saved, I invested, I did what I needed to do to create the home. So at the end of the day, I think it really allows us to really find that those things that we're grateful for stick with us further, because it's only when we think of them as something that we need to get rather than want to get, then the pressure is lessened.
Yeah. Well, what makes resilience sustainable instead of temporary?
Well, it goes back to what I mentioned about, I believe in something called adaptive resilience, that when you're in it, rather than resilience, because resilience is definitely something that a lot of people say that it's a trait. Either you have it or you don't. I don't believe that per se. I think when life pushes you and when the pressure mounts, adrenaline comes in and you then find your way through that. So I think when it comes to resilience in general, I think it's a muscle that you can strengthen. I think it's something that you can actually learn. I think it's also something that you can emulate. I think it's important to have, because in our world, the world that we live in, there's a lot of challenges that people are being faced with. And a lot of people are not feeling like they're being seen and heard. Resilience gives you the ability to accept those things, to swallow those things, but to allow yourself the ability to see much greater than the problem.
What legacy do you hope your work leaves behind?
I'm not really attached to a lot of wisdom, but therefore I'm also not too detached. I think there's a danger in being either or. I live in the middle ground of knowing that for some reason I'm still here after surviving cancer twice. Since my relapse in 2024, I've known 8 people who lost their battle. Some of them, it was their first time. So in terms of my identity, my legacy, my ability to give, to share, to learn, to grow, I think I'm motivated, and I want people to understand that life sometimes sucks, but it's also beautiful if you're able to be objective about where it's taking you and what it's trying to show you. I believe that life is an adventure, even with the sweet and with the sour parts of our lives. But I think it's also important for us to have perspective and to allow that perspective to filter down. So no matter what belief system or ideology or philosophy you believe in, allow yourself breathing room and space to grow from those things.
Have you ever, the process of thinking, had to spend some time and say, because it's an exercise, most people write a version of your obituary in the to see, okay, what do I really want to be remembered for? Like, what's the end game here? And that way, they kind of reverse engineering and then start living towards that life. I don't know if that's something you've done or maybe a version of that.
I think I'm here for specific things, not only to survive, and I'm grateful for surviving now a second time, but I think I'm also here to remind people to not forget. I think it's easy to forget.
Yeah,
And I think
it
my
is.
life has shown me an embodied way to learn that lesson for myself. In other words, to not just say it, but to believe it, to live it, to be it. And I think that's the hard part because all of us can speak of things, but many of us can only speak of things when we've been through the fire.
Yeah,
And I'm a living testament to the fact that I've taken the fire and I've tried to mold it into something usable that other people can see light from, other people can see hope from, other people
yeah,
can see resolve from.
that's really lovely. Thank you for sharing your story and just reminding us that sometimes we're no longer in the cage, but yet we're afraid to move past the boundary lines because in the past, when we tried, there were electric fences and we got sapped. And just giving examples, now we're free. We're actually free, and we should behave free. And yeah, where can listeners learn more about the work you do and also connect with you?
Absolutely. They can find me at my website, saviopclemente.com, SAVIOPCLEMENTE. I have my keynote work there. I have a few more spots left for 2026. They can see my
You're nearly
TEDx
done.
talk. They can see my book information there.
Yeah, yeah,
Every Wednesday I have a Substack newsletter where I talk about the head, heart, and gut intelligence, where I call the three brains. Right now, I'm currently running a interview series with CEOs and CMOs about the
yeah,
healthcare
yeah.
leadership operating system. And then if people want to find me on social media, I'm at every platform at The Human Resolve, because like I echoed earlier, what else do we have but resolve and resolution in our lives?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I'll put the links mentioned in the description so the listeners can click and go directly to the site. Thank you, Savio. It's been a lovely conversation.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Wisdom.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for tuning into Wisdom Journey. I hope today's episode gave you practical steps and fresh ideas to keep moving forward. If you found value, be sure to subscribe and share this podcast with a fellow creator or entrepreneur who'd love to learn too. And don't forget to sign up for the newsletter and the link in the description for more resources, experiments, and lessons straight to your inbox. Until next time, keep building, keep learning, and keep walking your own wisdom journey. Yeah.